It was very much looking for a life raft, semi-drowning, and just trying to grab anything that could help me stay afloat because I was getting really tired of treading water. I made a decision in and of that conversation, like take a month off from life. Like we were selling our personal goods out of storage to pay groceries and rent, but I still knew I have to regroup. I have to like find myself. And I'm looking at her and I'm like, this is terrible timing for this, but like I need to get away for a minute. I don't know what that looks like or what it is, but I need to get away for a minute.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to Boom Vision. Today's interview is my guest, Dan Bennett. Dan's an entrepreneur and a friend, and I'm excited to share this interview with you because he's got quite a story. I appreciate Dan sharing candidly how he went through one heck of a roller coaster of a ride, both personally and professionally. After hitting a low point in his life, what in the world happened when he went into the woods? What happened in there that allowed him to emerge with clarity and direction in this next chapter of his entrepreneurial journey? You'll definitely want to tune in to today's episode. Let's cue the intro. Welcome to the Boom Vision Podcast. I'm your host, Benjamin Ye. This show is about how to create success on top of a solid foundation of your mind, body, and soul. I created this podcast to give you perspectives and frameworks on how to strengthen your mindset and gain clarity in finding your true north. It's time for you to live an extraordinary life with vision that you design. Let's get to work. I went into the woods because I wanted to live deliberately. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to put to rout all that was not life, and not when I had come to die, discover that I had not lived. This was a Henry David Thoreau quote shared by Neil Perry in the movie Dead Poets Society. Welcome to episode 18 of the Boom Vision Podcast. I'm happy to share today's interview with Dan Bennett. Dan is a friend and a fellow member of the SPI Pro that we're both part of, where entrepreneurs and solopreneurs come together in a like-minded community. I'm excited to have Dan join us today because you'll get to hear his own hero's journey going through life as an entrepreneur. As a brief background, Dan Bennett was born and raised in the gritty city of Flint, Michigan. He is the founder of 1 Minute Media, a company that empowers individuals to tell their stories through great video, through coursework and a private community membership. He is also a digital media freelancer who offers direct consultations for companies, as well as decades of experience in video production, video editing, motion graphics, sound design, graphic design, and digital content development. Dan's personal brand uses the moniker The Antipreneur, which encompasses his podcast, The Antipreneur Show, his YouTube channel, The Antipreneur, and all his social media platforms at I'm the Antipreneur, and Twitter at Real Antipreneur. So without further ado, here's Dan Bennett. Dan Bennett, welcome to the Boom Vision Podcast. Thanks so much, buddy, for joining us today.
Hey, Ben, I'm excited to be here. I'm not just saying that. I've actually been thinking about this ever since it was scheduled. And you're inviting me into a space that I wish more entrepreneurs could come into. So I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. I guess before we begin, we've gotten to know each other in the last month or two, but it feels like I've known you for a while now. If I'm being honest. I would love for you to share sort of your origin story, like in terms of your personal journey, your professional journey, anywhere where you want to start. What's Dan Bennett's story?
Oh man, pick a point, right? So going way, way back, but not too deep. Broken family, a lot of violence, incredible single mom who raised 2 awesome boys. Me and my brother are very close, and we're both successful in life in one regard or another. And that's attributed to her. So hi, Mom. I'll make sure that she listens to this episode. I like to pick a point where entrepreneurship began for me, but I had no idea that's what it was called. It's very accidental. So I have an engineering background, hated it. It was one of those things where in school, my drafting teacher was like, hey, you're really good at this. You should go to school for it. And I was always a, varsity athletic participant, but I knew there was no like college, in my future. I started, but I was no star. So it was like getting into music, getting away from sports. I knew that wasn't going to be a career or anything like that. And that impact from a teacher saying, "Hey, you're pretty good at this," I was just kind of blindly like, okay. So I actually got my first drafting job before I went to college, kind of started going down that road. All throughout this whole time, I played music. I was in bands, was in a band that was starting to get some momentum. We toured a bit, having a lot of fun. And I was doing that at the same time as having this, click a mouse and dread my days type of thing go on. Long story short, I was having a conversation with my AutoCAD teacher in college, and I couldn't opt out of his class. So he let me implement testing and quizzes and stuff in the morning. So I still had to be there, but I didn't have to do the work. And we kind of became friendly, not friends, but kind of became friendly. And he was relying on me a little bit heavily. He'd like, "Hey, get the quizzes going. I got to get my dry cleaning. I'll be in a minute, And we're having a conversation one day, just a friendly conversation. And I didn't prompt it, but he brought up his salary, and it was only about $4,000 more a year than me. And he had the degree I was going after. And that was kind of the final straw of, I don't want this. I don't, like I'm doing all this work. I'm halfway through a degree. I'm studying my butt off. I'm going to work every day and school after, and all to get like where this guy is like, no, I'm out. So I actually left cold, the engineering field. And I was in a band at the time, like I said. So it's like, I'm going to take a year off a lot later than most people do. I was like 23 at the time and doing the band thing. And I started realizing that, I'd go in to get more merch from the t-shirt printer, and he'd say something like, "You sell a lot of shirts, man." Like, "Yeah, we got to make money to keep the band alive, and any other bands that need shirts?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, if you land any orders for me, I'll give you 15%. I'm like, "Well, heck yeah." So I started doing that, making a little bit of change. These bands start realizing our designs are a little better than theirs because I'd been in Photoshop for a while. So I'm making their merch. They're starting to see our website's a little better. I'm going to date myself, our MySpace was a little better. All these things the bands need to kind of make it at the time. And so I started doing that work, and it clicked. Again, I didn't know I was becoming an entrepreneur, but I understood that I was helping other people tell their stories and getting paid for it. And after about a year and a half of doing that, I walk in one day, and I'd gotten to the point, if anyone knows anything about screen printing, I was bringing in the artwork to him that he could burn a screen from. So it got to the point where I did half his job for him before he ever got my order. And I walked in one day, and Mr. John Hankard, who I love to this day, was like, "Hey, man, you want a job?" And I'm like, "I could use some steady income right now." "Yeah, because I'm trying to find my way." And I ended up running the art department for that apparel printer for a while. And that was kind of my introduction into entrepreneurship. And 2009, the band thing was kind of wrapping up, and I knew that. So I wanted to, I'll date myself again. I wanted to have a CD, DVD, double disc, for our last kind of hurrah, because we were all kind of like, this isn't going to happen. And we're all old enough to accept that we're okay, whatever. And so there's a lot of behind the scenes filming in the studio. And then I made a music video and took it very serious. To this day, I love sharing it with people because we got the actors, we wrote the scripts, we did it, all the way through. And that was my first kind of introduction to video. And I got the bug. I realized that I'd been helping people tell stories for a while. And wow, video is this incredible vehicle to take story where it's going. And ever since, in one form or another, leading up to today, it's been some kind of mix of using video to take someone else's story where it needs to go.
Got it. Wow. Okay. So that's quite a bit of a change. So it sounds like you had a couple of different chapters, from not just an engineer, but then also being on a band, which I'm assuming with live events, it's like on a road, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And then from there, it sounds like through living a life from just pure passion, it kind of pivoted you towards this different, unique path that you never thought even you would want to create in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely a lot of points within that very high overview I gave in a short amount of time, right? Where I was like, huh. And it became more and more clear to me that you, Dan, looking at himself at the time, you can't really plan for this sort of thing. I didn't go to business school. I didn't go to music school. I didn't go to film school. I didn't do any of these. I went to school for engineering, and I totally left that career. So a lot of this was, and still is, completely discovery based. Yeah.
Do you feel that your background in engineering has any part of those elements has helped you prepare for the subsequent second, third, fourth chapter that you're going through right now, that you're essentially writing?
1,000%. Yeah. Two things came from having that drafting and engineering background. The first thing is structure, framework. If a part's put in a place where it's not supposed to be, the system doesn't work, so just kind of the rigidness of engineering in general still comes into play in business now. So standard operating procedures, systems, handing off work, making sure things are done right. And also the client work I do for other people, making sure that's executed appropriately. The other thing was that I realized, at least for me, I know it's not actually your left and right brain, but we'll use that example because people know it. Your creative side and your more analytical side. I realized throughout that journey, especially starting my own business eventually, that left and right brain didn't play together. They weren't enemies, but they didn't hang out. And so there was never going to be this like melding of the two brains. So I got really, really good at switching in between them. And it's funny because in the last 10 years, I've heard many incredibly successful and articulate and intelligent people talk about this switch, And nowadays I got it down to about 10 minutes. As long as I got enough time to like go make a cup of coffee, get out of the office, see some sunshine for a minute, whatever, I can switch between like sales and business development mode into like a creative edit time block or something like that. So engineering gave me those two things. It gave me the understanding that you don't always have to have a framework, but things go smoother if you do. And then switching in between the creative and analytical minds.
So that switch, that's interesting the way you described that switch from the left to right brain, because I went through something similar to that in my, second and third chapter of my life, from corporate investment officer to now coaching as well. But, I'd love to hear your thoughts in realizing there's a switch and realizing you're honing and strengthening that muscle. Did that happen in the last 5 years? Because I think, part of also your story that I'd love you to kind of dive into more is what I call like a rebirth almost of what you've been through and where you are now, And so, maybe you can describe a little bit, just zooming out, what's happened for you in the last 5 years from the previous company versus what you're doing and what you're up to right now.
Yeah, for sure. So a little over 5 years ago, a lot of transition. I love talking to you because I've also viewed my life in like chapters, and they've always been about 4 to 6 years long, and definitely not by design. So the beginning of this chapter I'm starting to reference now was actually divorce after like 15 years of marriage, and like a lot of change happening, me moving out of the city that I lived in at the time. And I ended up working for this small production company. It was 2 guys at the time. I was the third. I was brought in as like the designer because I had, my graphic design background, and then kind of like learning the ropes as far as filming, editing, motion graphics, stuff like that, to kind of contribute to the team. And so a lot was changing. I'm finding myself, don't regret being married by any stretch of the imagination, but the last year and a half was really like, I could have done without it, and I found in that last year and a half, I hadn't been serving myself. I'd only been serving the team and or her. So it was like dance time. It's like, what do I want? What drives me? What am I excited about? Let's go find that. And I was able to do that through working for that company. I won't name the company because the parting was not bad, or not good. I'm sorry. It was bad. And like, I found so much good in it, that I'm glad it happened. I was supposed to be made partner. I saw that wasn't going to happen. So I struck out on my own. And I knew starting that first company about 6.5 years ago now, that that engineering part had to come in. I had to have like some kind of structure if I was going to go out as an individual and try and land work and produce that work and not take too much work, and all those different things. So it definitely kind of started to come more into play there. And there's a couple different iterations of that, a lot of stories, of course, over that chapter. And then 2020, like many people, lost everything, started over, had to shut down my business, personal bankruptcy. I was being sued at the time. So there was this long drawn out court thing that was taking forever. And the pandemic shutdown only made that longer because people couldn't go into court for a while and all these different things. And the tenants I had that were renting property from me all quit paying because they knew they couldn't be kicked out. So they were taking advantage of that. And I lovingly, and I mean that, I lovingly refer to it as the great Band-Aid rip of 2020, because everything in my world was essentially one version or another of lost in about an 8-day period. So it was very like, whew, all right, here we go.
Wow. Yeah.
And in that kind of like starting over, I already had the framework. I knew how to serve my clients well. I knew what everyone else needed, but I was starting to learn what my business needed and what I needed to actually thrive as a business owner instead of just creating something that created revenue. Yeah. So that was a big shift for me, those two kind of points. And that was the beginning and end of the last chapter of my life. And 2020 was the beginning of this one I'm in right now.
Got it. And Dan, when you were going through that Band-Aid phase and really almost having to reinvent yourself, you shared a little bit before about literally going into the woods. Can you tell me a little bit
Yeah.
about that process and that journey, what you went through in that?
Yeah, there's a beauty in this too. So I just want to let anyone listening know it's not like I sat at a desk and was like, you know what I'm going to do? I got this all figured out and here's the next steps. It was very much looking for a life raft, semi drowning and just trying to grab anything that could help me stay afloat because I was getting really tired of treading water. So I was in a little bit of a, not only financially stuff, but mentally a little bit of a desperate kind of mode. And I had closed down my offices. Born and raised in Flint, Michigan. It's a poor city, so you can get a lot there for not a lot of money. And I had this gorgeous office in this office building where they rented out office space to people and didn't have to pay a lot for it. So it's this great like little oasis for my company. And the final thing that happened in the Band-Aid rip was shutting the doors to that and going home. So went home and I'm looking at my partner, Jax, and she's a chef and she had lost everything at the exact same time. Plus she was contributing a little bit to my business too, some administrative stuff. So we both just kind of lost everything all at once. And we're sitting there looking at each other, and two things happened there that are really beautiful. One is that I looked at her and I looked at myself in her eyes and I was like, we're way too talented to be this broke, like we are. And it's not like an ego thing. It's we're both so good at what we do. We should not be in this situation, And the second thing was I made a decision in and of that conversation, like take a month off from life. Like we were selling our personal goods out of storage to pay groceries and rent, but I still knew I have to regroup. I have to like find myself. And I'm looking at her and I'm like, this is terrible timing for this, but like, I need to get away for a minute. I don't know what that looks like or what it is, but I need to get away for a minute. A couple of days later, I was out grabbing some stuff from my office and bringing stuff home. And I walked in and she was like, hey, where are you going to take the trailer? And I was like, trailer? What are you talking about? Like, I don't own a trailer. Like, do we have to help someone move? Like, what are you talking about? And she's like, no. I went to this company called Outdoorsy and I rented you a trailer. Like, where are you going to take it? And I'm like, holy crap. Like this ride or die partner of mine took a credit card we probably should not have been spending money on and went to Outdoorsy, which is like Airbnb for camper trailers and RVs and stuff, and rented me this cute little pop-up trailer for like 10 days and said, go wherever you have to go. And in Michigan, there's a lot of state land and a lot of it you can park a trailer, a camper or whatever. There's not always hookups, but you can be there and be there legally. So I started kind of looking at state land and stuff. And I was telling an old, this ties in so well too. I was telling an old boss and then partner of mine, John Hankard, who owned that printing apparel company back in the day that I worked at, about this. And he's like, oh, why don't you take it to the campground? I was like, campground? He's like, yeah, don't you remember I accidentally bought a campground? And I'm like, oh my God, I forgot. And that's a completely true story. He's been looking for land up North Michigan for a long time. His son-in-law was on Facebook Marketplace and he's like, you should buy this, old man, and it was land and building that he was looking for and happened to be an old shut down campground that hadn't been open in like 10 or 15 years. So we're having a laugh about it. He's like, no, I'm serious though. I got a couple spots in there. There's one bathroom stall that works and there's a couple posts that have electricity running to them. So you can plug in, you got water, you got bathroom, you got electricity, go. There's no one there. It's all yours. And talk about serendipity. Like that was just this incredible happenstance. So I went up. His land is right next to state land. It also has a small lake on it. And I just was in this beautiful place. And I took a whiteboard, a book, and an old iPad full of documentaries in case I need a little bit of entertainment and no agenda. And I went.
So first of all, I got to acknowledge your partner, man, because that is a solid thing for her to do. Knowing what you need in the right time, so that just kudos to her, honestly.
Yeah, that was rad.
Yeah, no. Secondly is, what book did you bring? And
I know, right?
And what came out of that 30 days being in that physical and mental oasis,
Yeah. So I love talking about this because I've read many times in my life, someone write or say or whatever, that book changed my life. And I've had some books that really impacted my business and myself. but I never had one that changed my life. And this book did change my life. And not to discredit the book, it's an incredible book. It does well and sells a lot. So it doesn't need my help at all. But I don't think it changed my life in and of itself. I think it changed my life because of where I was. And that's the only book I took. And it was just so primed to be what I needed at the time. So I took Atomic Habits by James Clear. And the way I absorb books is kind of unique. I'm sure other people do it too, but it's unique to me. So I'll listen to a book first, then I'll listen again and read along. I don't read the book, I read along to the author reading on an audiobook. And then instead of highlighting or dog earing, I write the concepts out on a whiteboard and fill the whole whiteboard and then take a photo of it. And that's my like reference to go back. So instead of a highlighted book, I got a big photo of a big whiteboard and I can zoom in and look at different things that impacted me or I was thinking. And because of this starting over space, Atomic Habits just hit the nail on the head because it was like, while I'm starting over, this is a good time to implement new habits, and here we go. So it was absolutely life-changing because I was just ready for it at that point in time. So that was the book. James Clear, I know you're listening, so shout out to you and your success. And then I went knowing it was going to be painful. I was open to that. I went knowing I might leave without answers. I went knowing that I only had 10 days with this camper in this woods and I might find nothing. And some of the hard work might continue after this beautiful experience. Like I said earlier, my partner Jax is a chef. So I went with a bunch of prepared meals too, which was great. So that sustained me for the 10 days and I just got to work. I had a really cool conversation before I left, knowing I was leaving, with a really cool acquaintance of mine who runs an incredible nonprofit in Arizona. And she helps children from abused homes. So a lot of the things that are available for people in those situations are for the adult. And they hope the services trickle down to the kids. This serves the kids directly. And I've always been, in admiration of her. And she's like, she used to be the VP of marketing for Domino's. So she knows stress and national chain and all that craziness. And she's like, I had a starting over moment as I was kind of leaving that position and doing my own thing. And she's like, I did. I love knowing that you were taking a whiteboard with you, Dan, because I took a whiteboard and I put my life on a timeline. And then I just picked certain parts of it and kind of zoomed in. So I did that. That was the one exercise that I did on purpose. Wrote my 4 to 6 year chapters that we talked about on a whiteboard, just as like a timeline, like you'd see in a school book. And then I would take one event, one thing that happened, one thing that stood out, erase the board, and then make the whole board that thing, that period of time. So almost like you would on a phone, pinch to zoom. I did that on a whiteboard and I would just take a photo every time so I could reference back and forth, and started doing deep work. I left that time with a lot of what I call micro-epiphanies. And a lot of them are what I call like duh moments. It's stuff we know, it's stuff we've heard, it's stuff really successful people around us have told us. It's stuff that people we admire and look up to have said over and over, but it's got to click for you. And some of those things that I always knew clicked for me. And it kept happening and it kept happening. So even though it was painful, I didn't know where I was heading. I didn't know what was next. I was getting all these like puzzle pieces clicking into place. I'm like, oh, okay, this feels good. I don't know what's happening, but I can feel it. And it feels good. And one that I've shared with you before, it's a little bit out of the context of what we're talking about, but one of those micro epiphanies was I've always been an empathetic person. I care about other people. I really can feel other people's pain and try and help any way I can. But there's always this internal. I never did it externally because I never wanted to hurt anyone. But internally, I would look at people's situations sometimes and go, oh, man, you're complaining about this and you're letting that keep you back. What are just like, that's nothing, man. You should look at what I've went through in my life. Like, dude, you're so talented and you have so much potential. Just do the thing, And I would have those conversations internally because it was never to try and run someone else's life or hurt them. And this micro epiphany, one of them I left with was someone else's 90% capacity and anxiety and overwhelm could be my 10%. And from here on out, Dan, you better look at other people and say that first. You better look at them and say, they're going through a lot. They're making a lot of excuses, but they could be at 90% capacity right now. And it just looks like 10 to you because you've been through a different life than them. That was a huge one for me. So that's one example of some of the powerful micro epiphanies that happened for me that I kind of exited that time with.
That's beautiful, man, because it's like, the imagery I get when I'm listening to you share that epiphany It's almost like, if you're talking to someone that's a marathon runner and someone's just starting to run their first 5K, it's like, well, for a marathon, that's easy peasy, but you have to kind of, take a step back and like, yeah, I remember the first time ever running a 5K. That was tough. We're in different
Yeah.
places and you've ran through different physical, mental hurdles, right? And laps of your own. And to have that awareness it just brings a different perspective and to your point, empathy on what's going on, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was a heavy reminder that you never arrive and that's okay. Right. So
Yeah.
oftentimes I looked at my own situation, not patting myself on the back or anything at the time, but thinking like I'm an open-minded, empathetic business owner. Like that's a really good mix. I come
Yeah.
at things from a really pure standpoint. And I think that's good for my clients and myself. And then realizing like, man, you ain't even close to arriving. Like you still got so much to learn, and going, yep. Okay. Entrepreneurship is a journey that never ends. Okay. I've come to terms with that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And to kind of add on to your story, Dan, I'm curious because from that's a beautiful exercise where you're drawing these timeline. It's almost like these different chapters, and then you zoom in to real highlight what was the best thing that's happened during those chapters, but also what was the lessons that I needed to learn, right? And in doing those steps very thoroughly and intentionally, what was the two or three takeaways that led you to the current path that you've created for yourself? Because I know you now as, and you haven't described it yet, but it's about bringing out the best storytelling people in terms of audio and video, right? But what was it in that 10-day deep work that led you to connect the dots on, with this? I think this is my next chapter here, right? Was it even that process, or was it something entirely different?
Yeah, so I took a lot of notes while I was out there and then I revisited the notes. So September of 2020 was the full month of taking off. I had shut down my business and had no clients. So I really wasn't taking off from anything, but I was making sure not to just start right back into stuff. So I took September off and went over these notes. So some of those zooming in practices came to kind of fruition the following weeks back home at my office at home, my bedroom slash there's a desk in there too. And one of the ones that was really big for me was another thing we know this already, but it locked in for me. Wow has each chapter fed into the next. And if you look at any great book, of course they do. Of course they do, because you got to have chapter one to set up the characters. You got to have chapter two to lead with conflict and make us care about the hero. You got to have three, and on it goes. And I'm like, of course, these chapters have fed into each other, and that's both good and bad. Good things have carried over, so have some bad. So I saw some things that really needed to be killed that had just been carrying over from chapter to chapter. Another thing that was really big for me was I had looked at the last 5.5 years. So in 2020 in August, the past 5.5 years of running my business, where I had accidentally, now it was totally my fault and I take responsibility, but it was very accidental that I ended up in this agency model. We had monthly retainer clients. It was never the work I kind of wanted to do. I could never get away from people viewing me as like a video production company, even though that's not what I ever was. And we would start where I wanted, which was story development, helping pull that out of our clients and then making something out of it that they could use for their business. Marketing, advertising, storytelling didn't matter. And then, a client would be like, hey, we made that great video. It's getting a lot of traction. People really understand us better. You know our story. Could you help us develop some social media content for our content marketing? Like, cool. Yeah, we can do that. And then the next month would be like, hey, can we add them to our package where you manage our social media content and all that? And it's like, well, yeah, we want to keep the lights on, let's do it. And when we were shutting down, I was looking at my portfolio or my roster of clients and I was like, how did I get here? So in that retrospect, in that zooming in on that whiteboard, I was like, gross. Oh, this is disgusting. How did I get here? And then oh man, this speaks to a lot of conversations we've had already, Ben. I realized that I had this mantra, very, very purposefully had this mantra for the last 5.5 years at that point in time, where I said out loud a lot, tons of conversations, tons of speaking from stage, tons of entrepreneurial networking events, all kinds of stuff. My vision is just to make enough revenue where I can hire really talented and cool people that can have a job at my company and really love it instead of using their talents for some corporate entity that doesn't really care about much. And I had known so many people that graduated from creative institutions and had all this incredible talent and then worked for some corporate entity. And even though I was struggling, not making much money and running my own company, they'd look at me and go, man, I'm envious of you, Dan. And I'm like, well, you got the 6-figure salary and the benefits. And they're like, yeah, but you got creative freedom. So I realized that this mantra I had actually achieved. I had hired, I had brought on these talented people. I had these talented people tell me, God, I'm so happy to be working somewhere where we're like creative. We're helping people tell their stories. This means something instead of other jobs I've had. And in that, I was like, I need to start saying bigger stuff because I said something really tiny, which was make enough money to pay some creative people to work here. And that's not big enough. If I really want to change people's lives, it's got to be way bigger than that. So what that turned into, some of these things I drew out of it in the following month was I need to be super picky about who I'm working with. And I need to also look at the future and know how my one-to-one work, my quote unquote freelance work, can feed what I want to have exist in the future, because I don't always want it to be one-to-one work. And I don't always want it to be big companies and I'm a tiny little piece of it. I want to be more impactful than that. So about a week into September, 2 former clients, great people, great little small business owners, incredible people, came out of the woodwork, had no idea what I'd went through. They just knew that COVID shutdown happened. That's it. And they're like, hey, we got slow for a while, but we're speeding back up and we loved working with you last time. Would love to do this work. And those 2 jobs came in somewhere, if I remember right, around $2,100, which was about 3 months rent where we were at the time, cheap little apartment in Michigan. And I said I had to say no to both. I just knew it was a slippery slope back to where I was before. And again, incredible people, easy money, not hard work. I just knew I had to say no. And those are 2 of the hardest no's I've ever said in my life. I don't get hung up on money. I know it's a tool, but at that point, it was a tool that could put food in my family's mouth. So it was very, very difficult to say no to those 2 job opportunities, but I had to and keep moving. So those are some of the zoom in chunks that started to feed into the next chapter of my life.
Yeah, no. So that's amazing, because in those crossroads of opportunity, it's like, do you listen to your mind or do you listen to your heart? And what I got from you, Dan, is that your gut feeling, your intuition, something was telling you, if I am to recreate new habits that then translate to new realities, this is one of those situations where you would have to say no, as much as logically it might not make sense. You just knew it, that because that is a tough decision to make. And I'm curious, and after making that, what actually transpired in terms of either different opportunities or different energy coming into your life once you made up the mind and you delivered that respectful no to your clients?
Yeah. I love the way that you put it, because it lines up with what I was saying at the time, which is who's going to win out, my gut or my stomach? Because we were hungry. Now, I don't want to be too dramatic. We did pay rent. We had groceries, but it was very lean and it was tough to come up with the money to do so. So I don't want anyone listening to think we were destitute or had lost our home or anything, but it was on the edge and it was gut or stomach, who's going to win. And I actually just posted in this incredible community I'm in yesterday when someone was talking about they feel guilty sometimes because they do this incredible work and it pays well and it's great and they've been doing it a long time, but they want to do their own thing and they're finding it hard to like start to shift in that direction. And I told them, like, this is a little easier for me to say than it might be for someone to hear, because everything was lost in my world. So starting over was easy in the sense that I wasn't purposely getting rid of a bunch of stuff and starting over. It was taken away by circumstance and then I was starting over. But all that being said, saying no became a currency that I could then spend on taking my business where I wanted it to go. And so saying no to those 2 people gave me currency to spend and invest in my own business. And she followed up like, man, that was beautiful. The paragraph you shared and all that. Thank you so much. What was like a aha moment during that time? And I said, the aha moment was the second no I said, which it was the span of 3 days. It was like a Monday and a Wednesday. I got those. And a Thursday, I said no to both. I slept like a baby. Now, I didn't quit worrying about my family or where money was going to come from or any of the things, but I slept like a baby and I knew I did the right thing. So that's where, like, the kind of feeling, the mindset shift started happening. It's like, okay, I did the right thing and here we go. So another micro epiphany that I came out with, I love talking about this part, was I was sitting there, and sometimes when I tell this to people, they kind of tilt their head sideways like a dog does when it's trying to hear better. And they wonder a little bit until I explain it. But I'm sitting in this camper trailer by myself. And, one side of my brain is like, Dan, you should put yourself out there more. And then the other side of my brain is like, hey, first side of my brain, what do you mean put yourself out there more? We've been in a band, we've toured, we've spoken in front of conferences, we've put out hundreds of videos on the internet. I think we put ourselves out there quite a bit. And then me as like the observer of these two things, we're like, well, let's put a pin in this, boys, because no one's got any answers right now. And I made a note of it. So September 2020, I'm going back through my notes and I see this note, and I literally drew a brain with two sides in this conversation happening back and forth. And I'm like, hey, boys, we're revisiting this thought. What did that mean? And having a little fun with it. Right. And like what ended up popping up, I didn't conjure it. It just appeared, was like that side of my brain that came up with it the first time was like, oh yeah, what I meant was take advantage of things you normally wouldn't. That's what I meant by put yourself out there more. And then the other side of my brain and me as the observer were like, well, that makes sense. So I can do that. So I wrote it down. A couple of days later, I'm on YouTube, absorb a lot of YouTube content in the business realm. And I see a video, and it's of a guy named Noah Kagan, who's got a cool little software company called AppSumo, and never heard of this guy, never seen him, not aware of him at all. And I watch a video and I really related to him. He was like, no BS, straightforward, minimum viable product based type, just it was cool. And I'm like, all right, well, this is kind of cool, so I'll watch one more video. So I see a suggested video of his and I go and watch another one. And then the second one, he talks about these, like, I don't even remember the number, like 14 businesses that he had started and had failed. So he worked at Facebook early on, worked at Mint early on, had these like credentials that are pretty incredible, but it hadn't fulfilled him and it didn't take him where he wanted to go. And so he was starting his own businesses, and he used a website called the Wayback Machine, where you can put in an old website and you can see what a website looked like back then. And he was showing these old failed businesses through these old websites that he was bringing up through the Wayback Machine. And I'm like, this is like my type of dude, like dirt under the rug. It's not that you arrive and go, yeah, I got here because I'm awesome and you can be awesome too. It was, this sucks. This one made 10 grand. That one failed completely. This one I brought someone in on and I owed them money after we were done. That sucked. This one did pretty good, but we weren't fulfilled by it. So we sold it off at a small rate. You could just see the grit and grunge of this process. And so my big old take advantage of things you normally wouldn't, this big shift for me was to hit subscribe, which for a lot of people doesn't seem like any big deal at all. But at the time, I had never subscribed to any YouTube channel ever, because YouTube's so good at serving up what you're looking for and what you've recently researched and what you're into that I just never had to follow anyone. So I'm not against following anyone. I literally had no subscriptions at the time. So I hit subscribe, and then one day later, so the next day, I get this message and it's like, hey, since you subscribe to this channel, you're invited to the office hours, and only people who are subscribers are alerted to this and can attend. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. I'm starting over here. I'm an entrepreneur. This is my vibe. Like, I'll show up. So I show up, I'm in the chat. If anyone's ever been on YouTube during a live, you get your little chat window. You can interact with other people while the person's presenting or whatever. And I'm chatting with some folks, and Noah's like, hey, we got this Slack group. We're throwing entrepreneurs in. It's this cool little thing. Whoever's most active today in the chat, we'll throw you in there. And I'm like, okay, well, here's thing number 2. I don't dominate chats. I try to only speak if I got something intelligent to say or something inspirational, or I can contribute somehow. So I'm like, okay, how am I going to be the most active so I can get thrown in this group and also not just be the guy that's doing it for the sake of doing it? So I'm reading everyone's comments. I'm listening closely to him. I'm trying to contribute any way I can. I'm looking at my skill set and trying to see what I can do to help someone maybe understand something he's saying a little better. And 2 or 3 comments in, he pulls one of my comments up on the screen and he's like, oh, the Antipreneur, that's kind of interesting. Anyway, I like what you said here. And he read off my comment. I'm like, oh, it's kind of fun. Got a little shout out during this thing, and then I started thinking like, this is a good place to be if you're starting over in business, because there's hundreds of people in this chat seeing my name on screen. Someone somewhere might want to say hello or something, So then I got a little pep from that, and I'm chatting some more with some other people. And he shifted in this office hours to talk about YouTube. And at the time, he was just starting to really, really take his YouTube channel seriously, put a lot of effort and money and time into it. And he was talking about, thumbnails and titles and all the things that you hear about YouTube. And so in the chat, I was like, hey, I dare you to watch one of my videos and critique it so I can get better. Wink, wink. And he pulled that up on screen. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to do you one better. We're going to roast your whole channel. Get ready. And I'm in my seat. Of course, no one can see me because it's not Zoom, it's a chat room, rubbing my hands together like, oh, I got on his radar and I'm going to get some help from someone who's got almost 100,000 subscribers at the time. Like, this is cool. So they follow up with me afterwards, him and his video guy, Jeremy. And it was like a holiday. So the next office hours wasn't going to happen for a couple of weeks. And both of them sent me emails over those couple of weeks. Like, we're going to roast you so bad. Don't even show up. We're going to destroy you. You don't even want to do this. And I would just send emojis back, like smiling or like thumbs up or whatever. And to myself, I'm saying like, oh, you guys don't know at all. Like, I was in a band that would drive 1,000 miles and play to one person in some dusty bar somewhere. Like, you can't hurt me, So I show up to this roast and I'm in the green room of the software he was using to do a show. And he comes into the green room. So no one can see us. We can only see each other. And he's like, oh, crap. And I'm like, everything okay? Like, tech difficulties? What's going on? And he's like, nah, man, you look and sound better than me. Like, I don't know if I'm going to have you out. I'm like, are you serious, man? And he's like, yeah, man. Like, I don't know. I'm like, well, to be fair, this is what I do for a living. So I got a decent camera and a good mic. That's why this is the case. And he's like, screw it. Let's do it. So he brings me out. He roasts my channel. I take notes the whole time. His whole entire roast was on point. Everything he said was really, really on point and helpful and good. And it was, luckily I did, video for a living. So I looked and sounded good in my videos. He was critiquing the content and the delivery, which is what I really needed. So I ended up getting thrown in this private Slack group because I had been roasted. That leads to 100 other stories of people I've met and are still in contact with to this day who have been part of my journey. And about a week later, because he was not super active, but in the Slack group, I DM'd him in the Slack group and was like, what's next? And he wrote me about a week later. He's like, what's next? What do you mean? I said, well, I did everything you said on the roast. I changed everything and updated it. And what's next? And he was like, oh my goodness, like, no one ever does what I actually say. They just say they want help, And I'm like, well, what's next, brother? So that was the beginning of my YouTube journey, which is a whole nother story, but that was part of the rebirth of my business, is doing YouTube on purpose. And I was telling you off recording yesterday, I had this incredible sales meeting with someone I've worked with before, and I adore them as a human. We're going to get to work together again. It's a CEO of a SaaS company who was watching that roast and had no idea who I was, just happened to be friends with Noah, because a lot of CEOs are friends with each other when they got software companies, and had been one of my first really picky hires after that roast happened and after I lost everything and started over. Cam Fulton is his name. Search Actions is his company. And he's this beautiful human who does business the right way, a lot like you do, Ben, a lot like I do. And that tiny little back and forth between my brain sides, and that little micro-epiphany of put yourself out there more. What does that mean? It means take advantage of the things you normally wouldn't. Blossomed into this incredible start to a brand new chapter where I'm being super picky about my one-on-one work, and I'm leaving space to grow the digital side where I can work more one-to-many.
Wow, man, I'm feeling the chills because I really feel the energy of what you just shared, Dan. And I think you know this about me. It's when I feel that tingly feeling, it knows that it's my intuition telling me like we're totally on point on the right path here. But there's a few takeaways I just want to bring out on what you just shared, because there's two things. One is that small act that you felt in your mind of just clicking subscribe is such a monumental step in my mind, because when you listen to the intuition of telling you to take advantage of things you normally wouldn't, you're not doing it from an ego perspective or like, trying to capitalize on something or like, freebies. That's not the intention. But the intention is that it's, if I want to serve, well, how do I want to be served? So I got to click that. If I want subscriptions, I got to click subscribe. Right? You got to be able to eat what you want to dish out, right?
Yeah,
and the fact that you clicked it snowballed into the realm of what you really want to live into. And I have to, my gut's telling me it's because of that 10-day of understanding, of deep dive, of knowing what you want, knowing what you don't want, right? I mean, like, when you created this agency company where it's like, wait, I didn't set out to do this from the beginning. You kind of just snowballed out of your own control of what you really wanted, because sometimes in that daily hustle and grind, we get caught up in act of doing not knowing what direction you really want to set out in the first place, right?
So true. Yeah.
And the fact that you clicked that led to one thing, led to nothing, because then you got that momentum going. That's one thing I got out of it. The second thing I want to point out is, honestly, this is also it contributes to who you are as in your inner core, Dan, is that the fact that you had a open and curious mindset led to you being able to take advantage when opportunity does come by your way, knowing when to take it or when not to. Because it's so easy to get caught up in your own existing rhetoric of whatever your recursive story might be, saying that's not me. But when you made the decision, and I absolutely love the fact that you talk it out loud, because that's one of the things, in my show, I keep telling people that's a power, because we have these internal dialogue. And sometimes they get caught up in the concoction of, is that my negative self-talk, or is that my intuition, or is that just me talking? Like, who the hell's talking, right?
Yeah.
Because we have that internal kind of dialogue. But when you talk it out, when you whiteboard it, when you actually see yourself and trying to see it in a third person and like, okay, left and right brain, what are you talking about? When you're able to zoom out just to see it, you won't even be able to zoom out unless you're open and curious.
Yeah.
And I love that. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Before we started this interview, this word came up, and I'd love to get your thoughts on what this word means to you, and if it's relatable to you. And the word that came up is resolve. I don't know why, but something about just your way of being, your journey. What does resolve mean to you, if at all?
What came top of mind right when you said it the first time was like coming back home, centering, whatever you might want to call that. It's been this interesting thing where I find something. So like being in the woods and searching, I'm finding things. Sometimes if you just sit with yourself and you're trying to figure your way through a problem, you find something. It seems brand new. It seems like you had to go far, far away to get this relic that now helps you on your journey, and you bring it back home, and the hero's journey has happened. It always kind of seems like that. But when you said resolve, it almost made me feel like centering and being home within yourself is actually where the power comes from, because those things, they might come from outside sources, might come from you searching, might come through a great conversation, a podcast, a documentary, who knows? It's not always you going out and finding it. I physically went out into the woods, but I didn't leave myself, right? So I didn't realize that's what was happening, but that's how resolve just hit me. Is like you're resolving, you're settling. It's almost like sediment coming to the bottom of a bucket of water. You're letting the chaos kind of dissipate and resolving, settling into like, well, this is home base. Like I got some more stuff to learn, and there's going to be some things that come in and some things I get rid of. But I guess to me, that's kind of what I felt when you said that. Was the resolve is the chaos sometimes just kind of settling down a little bit, whether that's through meditation or a new chapter in your life, or having a great conversation with someone who's got a perspective you can't have because you're in the thick of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And in hearing your story, Dan, I just want to highlight, because I think it's the first step of giving yourself the permission and space so that you can start activating that process of resolve. Because not only did you do that for yourself, but and I say this a lot in my podcast on just what's the soil you're rooted in, right? It's a soil, water, and sun. Whatever you're rooted in, your environment, that's either going to nurture you or it's going to bring you down. The water that you do on a consistent basis, are you watering your mind on a daily basis? Are you nurturing your mind on a daily basis? And then the sun, what are you doing? Where's the sun rays that's giving you fulfillment? And I think what's really beautiful on this next chapter you're currently creating as you're going is that you are making a conscious effort on where's my soil I'm rooting in, because having a partner that's so supportive, giving yourself the space to be a resolve, without that nudging of the people around you in giving yourself that nurture rather than weighing down. I mean, that's the difference between whether you're going to actually take that action in time to do yourself or not.
Yeah.
And so
that's heavy in a good way. That's how I feel the weight of that. There's a little story I tell all the time during this time in my life of 12 people. I counted them because I got so frustrated. 12 people during that shutdown time said in one form or another, like, man, I'm so glad that you're a resilient person, Dan, because this is really heavy what you're going through. And the 12th person was my good friend, Rob Bogan. And I remember internally, I was screaming at him. And externally, I said, can I tell you something? Keep it real. And this isn't about you. It's just about how I'm feeling right now. And he's like, yeah. And I said, man, you're not the first person to say that. And it's really ticking me off that you said it, but it's not ticking me off that you said it. It's how I feel about you saying it. I'm sick of people telling me that I'm resilient because I don't feel resilient. I feel like, when does resiliency become stupidity? Because maybe I should stay down and miss the next head kick or punch that's coming my way. And that's just human. That's real. You get beat up enough, you're like, maybe if I curl up in a ball and roll away, I could escape this, And then looking back, I've thanked him many times for being the 12th person to say that, the final person to really drive that point home, because I was like, thank God everyone said that. Thank God I heard it. Thank God I could pull from it later when I was in a better position to be hearing it again in my head, because we never know when you're in it and when everything's on fire. Like you're thinking instinctually, you're thinking self-preservationally, you're thinking with a reptile brain. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're humans, we're built that way. But like, if you can eke out a little bit of that resolve, a little bit of that space during the chaos, I always think of the meme with the dog and everything's on fire and I'm fine, like, if you can do that, beautiful things can happen, because, you're in a forge. I mean, not to get too cliche and stuff, but like when stuff's on fire, you're being molded, and that does not feel awesome, but it's necessary. And if you can make space, that's where, some of those beautiful transformations can happen. And again, I'm very, very transparent. I'm not saying in the middle of this, I had it figured out and I'm like, I'm just going to leave some space and that'll turn into good things. I fought kicking and screaming like a baby that didn't want to go to the store. Like, I just wanted to curl up in a ball and be comfortable and escape everything. I'm sure some people can relate, but if you can just leave a little space for that resolve, I think really cool things can happen. And the last little point I'll put on the end of that is humans are good. It's tough to say that, we're in a world that's crazy right now. It's always been that way, but now it's just very known how crazy it is. Humans do bad things that gets all the attention. The good things don't as much. They don't stick around as long. But all in all, humans are good. And I found that entrepreneurs more so are good. They want to help. We're all problem solvers as entrepreneurs. So a lot of entrepreneurs want to help. And a lot of them want to help for free. They want to give you just 5 minutes of their time to say, hey, I've been through that. And here's the hurdles you can skip. They want to mentor you lightly, heavily, long-term, short-term. And I found that making that space and just sharing what I was trying to accomplish, sharing where I was, sharing how much it sucked, sharing how dim the future seemed, but I also know that it could be bright. Sharing all those things left space for other people to pour into me. And it's so uncomfortable. It is not fun. I'm not saying like pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get it done. I'm just saying if you can eke it out, do it, because cool things happen.
So speaking of help, Dan, what would be one or two advice you can share with the audience where someone might be feeling stuck, right? In the career they're in, they're not feeling that level of happiness based on what they're currently doing right now. Whether they're in that space or they're just stuck with growing and thriving because they're in that survival mode. What would be one or two things you can share and impart with our audience here?
One thing that comes to mind is I've always been someone who has said out loud, again, I say a lot of things out loud to kind of put them into place. I won't give advice unless I'm a master of something. So for years and years, the only advice I give is in video and storytelling. I will not give advice in business development, even though I've done it for a long time and I know a lot of things. I have to be at that like mastery level to do it. And when I was out in the woods, I thought to myself, I'd like another thing. I'd like a third thing that I could really give advice on and really know so well that I feel comfortable giving advice. And at that time, what I had was a way of getting people to think differently. So I would say, I'm not giving this to you as advice, but maybe as a different way to look at this. And that was how I would help someone who needed thorough advice on a topic I wasn't a master of. And so I was reflecting on those times and I was like, I want a third thing, but I really don't want to put 15,000 hours into something new. So like, what could that be? And left the woods during September 2020. I segmented a small part of my email list and I sent out an email to, it was a mixed bag. It was former clients who had become friends. It was what I call colleagues, which are just other entrepreneurs going through the journey too, mentors, mentees, people who knew me relatively well. And I sent out this email to about 30 people. And I was like, hey, everyone, a lot of you know, I've lost everything. I'm starting over. I just want to ask you to keep me top of mind. And you don't even have to like think referrals or sending me work or anything, but just keep me top of mind. Like, if you could do that, I'd like to offer up my services. You all know what my skill sets are. So if I could do anything to help you win real quick, let me know. I'm not just asking for help's sake. I want to trade. And I don't remember the exact number, but it was in the high 20s of people responded. And it was like, people had said I brought them to tears reading how like open and vulnerable I was, to people saying like, you know, you're doing the right thing. You're on your way. I'll tell you from the future, you're going to be okay. My friend Dawn Pateau, who is an executive coach, coached me for free as I started over, just to kind of try and contribute and help in some way. And the response was so overwhelming that I was like, wow, this is kind of cool. So I wrote everyone and I'm like, hey, since everyone responded, I want to ask you a question and kind of keep this conversation alive. So as a fun thought experiment, I still don't even know where this idea came from. It just popped in my head. So I started writing an email. And because I had segmented these people off, I just selected that segment. And I wrote, hey, if a news reporter came around and was like, oh, you know, Dan Bennett, what would you say his superpower is? How would you answer that reporter? What would you say? And it was just this fun little thought experiment. As I'm starting over, I really want to know what people thought of me about my skill set, my business, stuff like that. 10 people out of the 20 some that replied that time too said some variation of something I had never heard in my life. And it imprinted itself on my soul and will never leave. I had never heard this in my life. And it was, Dan, when you worked with me, when you talk in your videos, when I hear your podcast, when I'm on a Zoom call with you, whatever the case may be, your voice and your demeanor brings calmness and trust into me. And so when we do work together, or when I am educated by you in some topic, or when we converse and work together on creating video and these scary things like putting yourself out there and being vulnerable, I feel calm and trust because of you, your demeanor, and your voice. Now, I've never had anyone in my life tell me my voice made them want to run away crazy, but like I'd never heard this in my life. And what that became that day was my third thing that I can give advice on. And I know that it's true and I can say it to anyone without risking any harm. And that is, whatever you are trying to do, say it out loud to people. Talk about it. I don't care if it's the grocery store clerk. Hey, how you doing? Actually, I'm doing good. I'm thinking about making a coffee table book about how people got their first car, because you need a job to get the money to get the car, but you need a car to get to work. And we all figured that out somehow. I think that'd be a great entrepreneurial book. Anyway, thanks for bagging up my groceries. Whatever you're trying to make or do, even if it isn't going to come to fruition or the idea failed and you didn't even execute on it, talk about it out loud with other people. And if you're in the entrepreneurial space, talk about it with other entrepreneurs. It's the closest thing to magic that I've ever found in my journey.
Man, that was a lot to soak in, because I relate to that so much, honestly, because being able to say it out loud is the first step of taking action behind your intention. You can think it, you can think it, right? But until you say it and how it lands. And no, totally. When I launched my this podcast in September, I shared it in other interviews, but I don't think I've even shared it in my own podcast. But it took me 9 months to, I already knew the first 4 or 5 episodes I wanted to record. But when I first made the first iteration on episode 1, and I was replaying it, I was like, that's how my voice sounds like? Who in the world is going to want to listen to me? No, this is it. And I shelved it for almost like 6 months, because I was like, I can't, no one's going to want to listen. And it wasn't until my wife, and she's always right. She's like, she heard something from one of the classes she was taking, that she was in this program, this nutrition program, and I think it was either the founder or CEO was saying that when you're nervous, focus on service. And that hit it home for me, because I realized, well, me not being used to my own voice is just me being stuck with my ego, right? It's about me. And what am I really doing this for? I'm really doing this because I'm serving, because I wish my 30-year-old self had this language, had these concepts, because I didn't have it. I didn't know one articulate it in a way that someone like me would be able to understand. And when I focused my attention on the service, that's when I was able to crunch out the first 4 episodes and finally release it. But it was that half a year mental struggle of, it's a mental barricade that's really a mirage, right? And for you to be able to translate that in video form, and I'll say this, knowing you, Dan, is that, and I think I pointed out to you when when we first got to know each other, is that you are a master manifester by the words you say. And once you had a taste of it, realizing, holy cow, I do have the power of manifesting exactly what I'm saying, then it's like, well, am I just shooting for the Empire State Building, or am I shooting for the stars here now? Because whatever it is, it's going to happen. What is it that Dan really wants? Right. And having that intentional direction of what you want, and then being able to say it, now you're actually moving leaps and bounds because it's at the pace that you're ready for.
Yeah.
Right.
And it opens up doors too. This is no exaggeration. I stopped counting, near 100 plus times. It might even be in the hundreds now. It's happened so often since that email response from those people saying that thing. I have had one form or another of someone like, man, your voice is so soothing, or like, you got a great voice. It makes me just kind of feel chill. Or, we're talking about video, which is pretty stressful, but like, you're pretty chill about it, which makes me think I can do it too. It's happened hundreds of times since. And every time, to some degree or another, instead of saying thank you, or that's nice of you to say, or whatever, I'm like, oh, and I'm so glad that's the case, because the last thing you need as an entrepreneur is another stressful thing. So if I can be that voice, I am so glad, because it became part of me. And what I wanted to put into the future of my business was, we work with Dan because he's got the skill set and like, the technicals there. Any video company, any person could do that. But we like working with him because A, B, or C, and maybe B or C is, he just makes us feel good. He's just calm, and it's easy to work with him, and we feel better. And that opens up the door to them telling their story more effectively and more authentically too. So you can really discover these things and then find out you have this tool in your toolbox you never knew. And you're like, man, this is like a multi-purpose tool. I'm going to use this for all kinds of stuff. And it works. It works, man. Yeah. And it's all a mental shift. It's a mental shift of discovery, of not really knowing that about myself and having it pointed out. It's a mental shift of, instead of being shy and being like, oh no, you're just saying that, going, wow, this is a superpower I didn't know I had, to the mental shift of, I'm going to implement this everywhere I can, because apparently it exists and people care about it.
Yeah.
All of those things were shifts in mindset, that came with the journey.
Yeah, no, I there's so many times in talking to peers and coaches and whatnot, it's like, look, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to be able to read your own label being inside your own jar.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I remember hearing that from my friend Shuri Alexander, and I was like, oh, that's so true. It's not that it's impossible, but it just makes it really difficult. And until you can get a different perspective from someone that you can trust, and this goes back to the soil that you surround yourself in, right? That if they can give you that feedback, it lends to giving you a different perspective, and then and in turn helps you ask different questions, not only about yourself, but about your situation, how you want to go about it.
Yeah. I love the way that you just put that, because what that just told me is mindset is not just about the state of your mind. It's about how you use it. So some things are the state of your mind. Some things are changing habits and behaviors and the way you think about things. But then some things are your mindset towards a thing. It's, you know what? I'm realizing reading my own label from inside the jar is kind of difficult. So I either got to get out of this jar, or get next to a mirror, or find another jar just like me that can read my label. Like whatever the case may be, mindset can be part of that, like, action as well. And I think that's cool.
100%. I mean, Dan, I'm probably going to talk to you for hours on this, because you just gave me another train of thought, which, it's funny because, like, I think this past week we were, my wife and I went to pick up our kids because, our son needed new shoes. And usually I'm the one that either picks up, or my wife, not both of us, but we made it a point because he really needed, like, he was outgrowing it. And she asked a question where, because there's main two routes, like, the route that we go pick up our kids is a different route versus how we come home. And so she was asking, because she takes usually around 25 minutes to get to the school, and it takes me like 18 minutes, give and take a minute, right? She's like, why, I'm not like Speed Demon. I'm not driving that much faster than her. And so she asked the question, wait, what's the shortest way to go to school? And what I told her is like, well, it would be the way we're coming back home is the shortest way, but I don't think that's the question you want to ask. What's the fastest way to go to school? Because what I told her was why I get to school faster, why I go the longer way is because the longer way only has 4 stoplights that's variable. The shortest way has at least about 8 to 9. And so when you get caught up in a red light, it takes longer. Now, the way I'm going, I know it's a longer path, but it's faster only because when I time it right, I get there faster. So it depends on a question. You can do it more efficiently or the shortest. Both have different implications, right? And like, her being her, she sometimes would roll her eyes. It's like, no, I'm not trying to make it a coaching moment or anything like that. But I'll just saying to her, like, no, this is why. And I showed her, like, look, do you see how this one, there's literally only 4, but then if it catch it right, I just hit 5 lights on green. You can't do that on the shorter path. And that's the thing. It's like, what questions you ask, because that leads to different answers. Anyways, just wanted to share that based on what I need to share.
I love it. I think we could jam on just that for an hour, right? Like, because the first thing I thought, and I'll keep this short, is if you're with someone who's been down that path before and you're willing to listen, it opens up your eyes to like, oh, this is longer but faster. Thanks. And that comes with mindset as well, is just being open to other people who have been there before. And you don't have to let other people write your book, but man, if they've written a book already, you might want to listen.
Brings back to what you shared in the beginning, which is that I find it fascinating. And for me, I totally can connect the dots, is the fact that you had training from engineering. It's about SOPs. It's like, exactly how to fish. Granted, you might not have the amount of fish in the bucket next to you as of right now. And I remember you were saying earlier that it's like, we're way too talented to be that. And it's not coming from ego. You just know, because you've mastered fishing. But if you just point it in the right lake, in the right, fish rich areas, it's not even a question of whether it's going to happen or not. It's just a matter of when, right? And it's that knowing, and it's that knowing, but also taking action. That's usually the hardest part for folks.
It is hard.
Clicking that subscribe, clicking that, whatever it is for you, but it's doable. It's possible, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Take a deep breath and plug your nose.
Yeah. So, second to last question, Dan. The question I always ask my guests is, if the DeLorean and time machine was a real thing and you can go back in time 10 years ago, right? What would be one advice you would give to yourself? And I'll preface it with saying this. I am a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. And I understand that more and more based on all the ups and downs I had in my life. And so this question is more centered around, what advice would you give yourself in that, knowing everything's going to be okay, but like, what would you share with the younger self of Dan and knowing the journey he has ahead of him?
So let's see. Would have been 31, coming out of that divorce, striking out on my own for the first time, working for that small production company, trying to figure things out. Man, you know what, dude? It's your heart mixed with your talents is bigger than the stuff you're trying to do right now. And sometimes when you feel or think that, it's like, well, who am I to, and fill in the blank? But I would tell myself, like, you think this is cool, man. You could actually skip all this and go right to the next part, knowing the future. But I would tell myself, if I was able to listen to myself coming back from the future, it's so much bigger than this. So don't get caught up on how dire it kind of feels to do these small fry type things, because you'll do bigger stuff one day.
Nice. I felt that. I really did.
Me too, because I haven't thought of that before, to be honest. And that was, as soon as you said 10 years, I was like, oh, I know exactly where I was 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it was discovery. It needed to happen. Like you said, those things need to be put into place and everything happens for a reason. But man, would that be the thing where I'd say, hey, former self, you're probably not going to listen to this anyway, because I'm some weird guy from the future. But here's the advice, Yeah.
Awesome. So Dan, where can our audience find you? Like, take your time on this. Like, I love to know, just because I love how you shared that also when I was a guest on your show. Honestly, really take your time, because I really don't think you've actually explained like what you're up to in this current chapter, really. So love to hear, like, where can they find you? How do you serve your clients?
Yeah. The single sentence is I help entrepreneurs learn how to look and sound good on camera. And that turns into a whole bunch of things after that happens, but that's the main focus. Try and keep it easy. danhaslinks.com. My name's Dan. danhaslinks.com. All my links are there. My moniker, my kind of personal brand is the Antipreneur. Fun story behind that. If you look at any of my stuff, you'll understand. So my website is imtheantipreneur.com, and it's spelled just like entrepreneur, only with ANTI at the beginning. And a fun kind of introduction into my world, if you are someone who's thinking of video and storytelling for your business and doing a good chunk of that on your own, is a quiz I've put together to meet people where they're at on their journey. And it's quiz.video. That's the website. Short quiz, you get a result, you get a little nurture sequence with some tools for where you're at, whether you're a video beginner or a veteran looking to launch something new like a course or a membership. And always trying to give value. The other thing I'll say, I have a lot of people who come on my show who say this, and we always kind of chuckle off recording that not everyone takes advantage of it, and that's okay. But I'm 1000% approachable. I love solving problems, especially quick ones. I have a vast knowledge in my skill set, which means a lot of times I can solve problems that seem really big on your end, but only take me 10 or 15 minutes to do. And I love doing it. And if you go to danhaslinks.com, yeah, I'm on all the socials. You can find me anywhere. My DMs are open. My heart's open. I can solve problems quick if they're the problems that I know how to solve. And I got a pretty good sized network as well. So if I can't solve a problem, I can usually point you in the right direction. So.
Awesome, man. And I will include all your information in the show notes. So that will definitely be taken care of. I want to say this too, Dan, is also getting to know you. What I really appreciate about you, because I feel like we have very similar map and compass, is that we give more than we take. It's just to your core. And I can attest to that. And so when Dan is really offering that, like he really means it, guys. So definitely check him out. And you also have your podcast, which is
It comes from the short version of the story is 2017. I was making some video content. I was so sick of the rise of the digital entrepreneurial guru, and everyone called themselves an entrepreneur. And I was like, I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm an antipreneur. It's not anti-entrepreneurship. It's anti-magic pills, silver bullets, blueprints, all the shiny stuff that distracts us from actually building great businesses on the foundations that matter, right? So the Antipreneur Show has great guests, like an upcoming episode with Ben featured in it, where the only prerequisite is that you're an entrepreneur and you're doing it your own way. Crushing the status quo is kind of the tagline. And I'm just trying to give my audience access to people that I get access to all the time. And that has changed my life. So I'm hoping to change a couple lives along the way by giving people like yourself, Ben, a platform to speak to my audience and educate them on stuff that I'm not a master of. So it's fun. And most of the time I'm actually sitting there getting like a free consult on my show, because I'm like, ooh, that's good. Oh man. Yeah. And then I get to edit it too. So I'm hearing it again and it's really sinking in. So yeah, Antipreneur Show on all your favorite platforms.
fantastic. And guys, like I've clicked subscribe to your show. You're one of the 6 of ones I listen to on a rotation. So he's, if you can't already tell already from today's interview, I mean, he's a master in what his craft is, and he knows how to bring out the nuggets of what needs to be uncovered. So with that said, Dan, thank you so much for your time today. I think we have to do a part 2 sometime in the near future, because I just love vibing with you, and I really appreciate you, man. So thank you so much, dude.
Yeah, thank you. This was a blast, and you're doing work that needs to be done. You're talking about topics that need to be talked about, especially in the entrepreneurial community. It can be very lonely, depressing. We're in silos often. Well, a lot of us are remote. We need to be talking to each other. We need to talk about mindset and mental health and what we're trying to achieve and keeping all that healthy. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Wow. I hope you all enjoyed listening to Dan's journey as much as I did. There's so many good stories and nuggets I got from today's chat with Dan. The top 3 takeaways I got are, number 1, your words have power. Are you reaching for the Empire State Building, or are you reaching for the stars? When Dan said out loud his vision is to make just enough revenue where he can hire really talented and cool people that can have a job at his company and really love it, instead of using their talents for some corporate that doesn't really care about much, that's exactly what he did. What he realized is that in order to serve more people in his life, Dan has to aim higher. He needs to say a much bigger vision out loud. Now, I know confidence is gained and built one step at a time, but if you find yourself achieving those steps that you've declared out loud, it's really time to start exercising your imagination and start thinking bigger. The second takeaway is you gotta eat what you want to dish out. When Dan wanted to create his own YouTube channel to help other entrepreneurs look and sound good on camera, that small step he took in subscribing in another person's YouTube channel activated a chain of events that opened up more opportunities. He listened to his brain saying that you should put yourself out there more by taking advantage of things that you normally don't. So take that step. The third takeaway is whatever it is you're trying to do, say it out loud to people. Talk about it. Don't let your ideas just stay in your mind. If your intent is to serve others, don't let your negative SOS, your subconscious operating system, or your ego get in your way of sharing what you're up to. It's definitely helpful to surround yourself in soil that supports and empowers you as you are sharing what you're trying to do out loud. Last but not least, if you're an entrepreneur and have any questions on audio and video, please take up Dan's offer and reaching out with him with any questions you have. He really is super approachable and has a heart to help. Let him know that you heard him on the Boom Vision podcast and ask your question. Please feel free to share this episode with your family and friends if you feel that they can benefit from it. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe to Boom Vision Podcast to continue your journey together as we build a solid foundation of our mind, body, and soul. Please leave a review if this has made a positive impact in your life, or shoot me a DM on Instagram @BenjaminYeh. I'd love to hear how this has impacted you. Until next time, folks, be kind to yourself, be in the light, be you. Thank you so much for tuning in to my Boom Vision podcast. If you'd like to find out more about me and this podcast, head over to benjaminyeh.com. That's spelled BenjaminYeh.com. If you haven't already, click subscribe and I'll catch you next time.